And thank you for all being here. It's evening here on Cape Cod, where I am. I understand a number of you, it's morning, someplace in East Asia. So I have an interesting background. I was a teacher for 28 years. I taught first grade till I caught every disease known to man and had to get out of first grade. Then I taught 7th and 8th grade French. Then I taught 9th through 12th history. And I taught 9th through 12 Russian language and Chinese language for 25 years. I served as a head of school for 18 years, and I served as a board member of 3 schools and the chair of 1. I've been a consultant full-time for 28 years. But interestingly, I had a full year sabbatical from my headship at Breck School in Minneapolis. I think I was the first and only head in the United States at the time who got a full year paid sabbatical by my board to go away for a year, from which I did return for 4 more years. And while I was gone, I wrote a book on teacher compensation that was sponsored by the Harvard Ed School and published by the National Association of Independent Schools for 20 years. And a little story was I was in the NAIS conference in Anaheim, California, when the book was first published, and NAIS gave me a room in which to speak to about 60 people who might come and understand and learn more about the book. And instead of 60 people coming, I think it was more like 600 people showed up in the hallways, and it became quite a logistical nightmare to figure out what to do with all those people, because I think we had all underestimated the impact that the topic was having, not only on teachers, but on board members and other people. So that book was about not so much how much money you pay teachers, but how you pay teachers. What is the philosophical underpinning to how money is paid? It's interesting, boards of trustees, if they're going to be truly strategic, have only 3 jobs. One is mission integrity, and under that falls strategic planning and governance. One is fiscal oversight, and the third is hiring and supporting and guiding their head of school. Under fiscal oversight, probably for day schools, for international day schools, the budgets for staff, salaries, and benefits is probably 65 to 85% of the budget. And yet probably almost no board members of our schools could tell you with any certainty at all how the benefit package works or how the salary system works, whether the salary system is published or not, if it's a percentage based only, or if it's a scale, or if it's a ladder. Probably board members could not explain that at all. And yet the biggest part of their job, and the biggest piece of that part of their job, which is fiscal oversight and salaries and benefits, they know nothing about. Also, if you think about heads of school, those of you who are heads, you're in the middle of an hourglass. The top of the hourglass is the board, the bottom of the hourglass are all of the teachers, and the middle of the hourglass is the head, who is supposed to persuade the board for appropriate resources to enable that head of school to hire, retain, nurture, support, grow teachers that teach the kids. So the head is right in the center of that hourglass, trying to interpret in both directions. And obviously the principals are also somewhat in that role as well. So I'm a big believer that there is always a salary system in place, whether you formalize it or not. In the old days, when heads negotiated individual salaries with teachers upon arrival, and maybe even negotiated some of the percentage salary increases from year to year, that was always, of course, considered unfair and biased and whimsical. But the reality is that was done by a lot of schools and still is. And the flip side to that is a very rigid, lockstep salary scale with lots of steps and maybe graduate credits and advanced degrees. So somewhere between the old system of individually negotiated systems, which were highly biased, and very rigid state school salary systems, which can be very expensive, there might be a whole range of issues in between, or styles or structures. But the important thing is this: every single school has a different mission. Every single school has a different history, a different faculty culture, and a different set of stories about how teachers feel they've been treated over time. So I did this work that I do with a lot of schools around the world, over 3,200 of them in the last 30 years. One of them was the British School of Brussels. British School of Brussels was made up of a lot of teachers who came from the British state school system. We created a process there of 3 committees that examined benefits, salary system, and evaluation. And they were happy enough with my work that they recommended me to another school in the Netherlands, not ed school. And I got a call from the HR director of that school who said, we heard about the work you'd done in Brussels and we'd like to hire you. And I said, fine, when should I come? And she said, no, you don't need to come. We just want to buy your template. I said, excuse me? We just want to buy whatever it is you did for that other school. And I said, well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You shouldn't do. You shouldn't borrow some other school's salary system because it doesn't fit. Each salary system should be mission-based and flow from the mission itself. In other words, if you had a brand new school and you had a distinct and unique mission, which you should, from that, you should devise a philosophy of compensation, not more than a paragraph. And from that philosophy of compensation, if you could then create a salary system that was mission-based, teachers who wanted your mission would come, teachers who sensed they didn't want that mission would not come. So we did this work, for example, for King's Academy in Amman, Jordan. And I remember that the king was in chapel at the initiation of that process and talked about wanting to create graduates who were bearers, torch bearers. He used the word torch bearers of peace and prosperity in the Middle East. And he wanted to have people drawn to the school as teachers who would help achieve that. So they created a salary system that was designed to help accomplish that, but it's very unique. Not everybody would want it because you work pretty hard, but you get paid very well. So I'm going to put up a PowerPoint. I don't want to live and die on PowerPoints, but it'll be a trigger for some of the conversation we'll have here. Okay, so what are the trends worldwide and what do teachers want now? Well, clearly teachers are tired. Teachers are tired of being abused. Teachers are tired of remote work. Teachers are tired of hybrid work. Heads are as well, by the way. I think heads feel more vulnerable and more unsafe than they've ever felt in their lives. That's the word I keep hearing on the circuit from heads. But from teachers, I also hear a lot about fatigue and being fed up. And interesting, I was watching PBS News tonight in the United States where they talked about large numbers of teachers quitting and just saying, I don't need this anymore. This occupation is becoming too challenging, particularly when parents are not only not appreciative, but in your face. So what are the trends kind of worldwide in teacher compensation? What is compensation theory and practice as it relates to teachers? How does mission and culture affect all of that? What kind of benefit options or flexibility could we create? What types of salary systems are schools using or could they use? What about absolute compensation levels? What do we know about those theories? And how might you fund changes to the salary system if you wanted to do that? So how do you attract and retain the best in a time when many teachers are discouraged and tired? How do you enable teachers to plan for their professional lives and livelihood? And by the way, I think professional development dollars are going to be more important in the next 2 or 3 years than they probably have ever been so far. How do we equip teachers to understand the rules of salary systems and the benefits and how to use them for personal and professional growth? And how do we introduce flexibility in compensation and benefits? Recent trends, there are fewer qualified candidates in the marketplace, leaving or not entering the profession due to disillusionment about pay and quality of life. Some teachers are feeling underappreciated and undervalued. And there is a need for higher starting mid-career and senior level salaries. And then the question is, how do we afford them? Compensation trends, I'm using US dollars here, but of course, whatever we could talk about, any currency in the country in which you work. In a US base, starting salaries are between 45 and 55. By the way, in Canada, their starting salaries are between 60 and 85. Median salaries of 60,000 to 85,000 and non-administrative salaries toward the top end of the system of 85 to 120,000 in independent and international schools. We need to be more creative in how we do all of this, however, since the pandemic. Schools are competing against one another for capable young teachers and heads, by the way. There are fewer mid-career and senior teachers leaving, but they can stay and undermine morale. In other words, if teachers are unhappy where they are, but they don't see another option that they can jump to that they like better, they can poison the atmosphere of the culture of teachers because it only takes 5 unhappy teachers in a faculty of 50 to pretty much undermine that culture of faculty morale. The most mobile group are those with 3 to 5 years of experience and ready to move where the money is, and working conditions are the most competitive. In the international scene, that has tended to be East Asia, followed by Europe. I would say Latin America is toward the bottom of that end, and Africa is toward the real bottom of that end. But of course, it differentiates between all of these continents, depending on which countries we're talking about. It's important to remember what compensation theory is. Most teachers are caregivers, not risk takers. Now, teachers who go abroad and risk going from their country to another country have a higher degree of risk orientation than teachers who may stay in their hometown or their home country. But by and large, teachers are still basically caregivers and not risk takers. And a lot of teachers that I've interviewed, which has been probably 100,000 of them over the course of 40 years, because I've worked, as I said, with over 3,200 schools over those years. And I've interviewed literally 30, 40, 50 to 100 teachers at a school. Teachers want absolute predictability of future earning power. Thus, they love scales because it appeals to them, at least initially, because I know what I'm going to get paid every year for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Other than the base increase, which the board may increase due to inflation, I know I'm going to get the step increase unless I die. I'm going to go up a step every single year. So for a lot of teachers who don't want to think about money all the time, they just want to know there's something predictable that they can count on, they like scales. So the problem with this is once you get absolute predictability of future earning power, so you don't have to think about it, you then have to find a way to influence your own future earning power once a rigid system has already been put in place. You might want to have a baby, you might want to get married, you might want to buy a home, and all of a sudden, the scale itself, if it's rigid, does not give you the flexibility to manipulate it in order to earn more money. You could take a job outside the school and do a second job. You could go into tutoring and make tutoring a cottage industry. But basically what happens is administrations and boards engage together in what I call a kind of contagious sick behavior, which is how do we negotiate around the scale? Because the scale itself was meant to give teachers that predictability. But then once they have that predictability, they want flexibility. And the two don't work well together. By the way, the vast majority of teachers that I've interviewed over the years, and Ed told me he remembered my saying this, when I ask them, and I don't tell them to prepare for this, when I ask them what their gross annual salary is, there is a moment of awkwardness and some laughter as the teacher says, well, I don't know. If I'd known you were going to ask that question, I would have brought my contract. And I'm thinking, how many business people, if you ask them how much money they made, they say, I have to go look at my contract. I suspect they know what they make. And then when I say, what is the amount of assets that you've accumulated in your retirement plan, either if it's a country plan, a state plan, or a private plan, I usually get something like, well, my spouse handles that. Or if I'd known you're going to ask that question, I would have looked it up. So my point is teachers are not driven by money, but money becomes a motivational negative factor if it's not enough, or if people don't know how to earn more. Money is often a symptom, not a cause of discontent. Many US independent schools still negotiate individually with each teacher for their salary upon entry, and sometimes from year to year. Other schools provide across-the-board percentage increases or a flat dollar increase. If you give across-the-board percentage increases to everybody, that benefits the higher paid and it hurts the lower paid. It's not a healthy way to do it. Flat dollar increases benefit the lower paid and not so much the higher paid. But if you're a school, as many are, where the board gives the administration, let's say a 4% pool or a 3% pool or whatever, and everybody gets the same 3 or 4% increase across the board every year, that's very unfair to the young and mid-career teachers. 85% of international schools pay according to a lockstep, longevity-based state school, public school salary scale. The vast majority of our teachers, probably 95%, and the vast majority of our heads, probably 98%, come from public schools. They don't historically come from international schools or from independent schools in the sense that these are not public funded schools. Many independent international schools have, however, shifted to use a band, a range, or a ladder system. It's an attempt to create flexibility and predictability in the same system. By the way, these systems were started about 30 years ago, that concept of a band, a range, or a ladder. Teachers have learned how to influence their future earning power through more steps due to many years of service, advanced degrees or graduate credits. By the way, in Canada, they don't do that at all. Extracurricular and coaching pay, tutoring, summer programs, outside jobs, stipends for assignments and extra work, and titles. One of the worst things that we've gotten into, particularly with the IB's made it so much worse, is that teachers who want to earn more money have all understood that to get ahead, they need to pad their resume, and that means they need to take on titles and administrative roles. And every time they take on a quasi-administrative role, even if they're a good classroom teacher, they get more money, they get a stipend, they get a reduced course load, which is very expensive to the school. And it means that we're losing our best teachers into administration, whether they want to do administration, whether they're good at administration. We have created a system that entices them into it because we don't pay really good teachers the same kind of pay that we're paying administrators. So teachers care most about comparing their compensation to what other high-end local, public, independent, or international or for-profit schools are paying. In other words, when teachers in a certain city or a certain country are looking at what they're paid, they want to look at what other schools that they consider their peer group would pay. Now, for the foreign hires to move around for different schools around the world in different periods of time, they're comparing international schools in different countries. So if you work in Spain, you work in Italy, you work in Great Britain, you're comparing the international schools in those countries. But if teachers are paid enough in their own mind, they don't care greatly about the salary delivery system. I worked for a school, I won't say which country or which school, but it was a school that some years ago, because of the dollar exchange rate with the currency of this in this country, the average teacher was getting paid about 150,000 US dollars. And because most of the teachers were married and their spouse worked there as well, together they might have been making 300,000 US dollars. And they got housing, and they got tuition remission for their children, and they got flights home. And basically, nobody much cared about the salary system because everybody knew you couldn't get that kind of money at any other international school in the world. The problem was a lot of the people didn't like the culture. A lot of the people didn't learn the local language. And there was a disgruntlement factor within highly entitled mid-career and senior faculty of wanting to leave, but the money was so good, they had to stay in their own minds. So the conundrum for the school was, we're paying too much because the people who we really want to have here, because they love the country, they're not the ones we're getting. And the ones who are unhappy here are not leaving because they're paid too much. So you have to balance being paid enough and not enough. So if you're paid a lot of money, you don't care about the salary system or the delivery process. If you're not paid very much, you care very much about the equity of the distribution process, and particularly want a scale. And there's more of a sense of social equity and justice if the resources are limited. And because for most international schools, resources are limited, teachers do care about the delivery system. So there are several elements to a salary system. The philosophy of compensation, often overlooked, and should be mission driven. That is, different missions lead to different systems. The salary delivery system flows from this compensation philosophy. Cash levels are most often a common percentage increase, and benefits are building in flexibility based on age, experience, and family status. But most schools don't actually provide that flexibility. It's a one size fits all in terms of the benefits offering for teachers. And that's something, by the way, that's changing right now in international schools. People are really exploring a kind of smorgasbord opportunity to create your own benefit package. So I really am an advocate of an intellectual dialogue of teachers, trustees, and administrators about the relationship between school mission, salary, and philosophy. And we've done this work for schools all over the world. It takes between 6 months to a year. And it does put teachers, administrators, and board members together, working together and sharing views and walking in each other's shoes. I mean that almost literally, understanding the perspectives of the other party. Administration and boards need to focus not just on the amount of money paid. The administration needs to review how each group of teachers benefits overall relative to the others. Usually one or more groups is following behind. So here's a little trick of the trade. Examine the average salary for your 5-year cohorts, not the median. Take the average salary of 0 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, 16 to 20, 21 to 25, and 26 years plus. Just get the average salary of those cohorts and see what it looks like. I bet for most of your schools, it's a roller coaster. Up, down, or it's up and then it's down. What it should be is consistently up by the equivalent of about $5,000 to $7,000 US every single cohort. But what happens if you look at it, you can tell very quickly which cohort is healthy and which cohort is not healthy. You can also determine very quickly which group of teachers are going to leave or are leaving because there are subtle signals that they're picking up over time that they're not valued. Sometimes it's the brand new teachers that we can't recruit effectively from the marketplace, so we have to up the salaries. But oftentimes it's the ones between 6 and 10 and 11 and 15. That group, the so-called mid-career cohorts, are often the ones that are hurt the most and are feeling pinched, and may also be the ones that have school-age children in the school. Culture is very important. Salary systems, if mission-driven, strive to nurture, support, enhance, and reward the desired cultural outcome. I gave King's Academy as an example of that. King's Academy in Amman, Jordan, wanted teachers who would do the boarding work in the boarding homes, would coach, would advise, and would teach. And that's a pretty hefty job. But the compensation that they pay for that is very competitive anywhere in the world. So the trade-off is, if you're willing to put that kind of time and effort into the life of the school, there are rewards for you, and it's not age-based. In other words, you could be 35 and earning as much as a teacher at another school who might be 50 or 60. Schools need to meet the needs of teachers differently. I'll go skip one. Teachers are not competing with each other. They're reaching for the school's goals as well as their own. By the way, there are a few schools, not many, but there are a few schools across the world where if the school does really well financially in a particular year, above and beyond expectations, then some of those schools sometimes create a kind of a performance pool where all teachers and all staff members get an equal amount of money paid out in one lump sum at the end of June as kind of a thank you from the school. Not many schools do this, and it's not necessarily something you can guarantee results in better treatment of kids and clients, but it's an intriguing idea that if we all do well and the school does well, we all do better. Schools need to meet the needs of teachers differently based on career status, family needs, and a willingness to save or take risks. Just giving the Canadian school example, most Canadian public schools have scales that maybe have 10 steps. And you might come out of college on step 1 at age 21, earning something like $60,000. So the good news is you go up the scale fast in 10 steps and maybe get to $100,000. The bad news is you go up to the scale fast and then you're flattened out at 10 steps. But given the fact that in Canada, Revenue Canada, which is their IRS tax authority, is very aggressive in taxing you after you make about $75,000 a year, then it's probably not a bad system, because the concept is you get up to a living wage very quickly and you're not going to grow a heck of a lot faster beyond that. But the idea is to make teaching a competitive profession, not a wealthy profession, but a competitive profession right out of college. That's not the view of how the US does it. We don't value teachers in the way in which we pay them, as Canada does, for example. Teachers typically will leave after 3 to 5 years if salaries or benefits are too low, or responsibilities are not increased, or if the school culture and climate are unhealthy. I was at a girls' school a couple of years ago before the pandemic, and I was working on this topic at this girls' school in Canada, actually. And I was sitting in the library, and it was an L-shaped library, and there were three more senior teachers sitting at a table who didn't see me around the corner. And a young teacher who had been hired recently bounced into the library and immediately exclaimed how wonderful the class she had just had in senior English had been. And one of the senior teachers sitting at the table said, well, stay here long enough and you'll hate this place as much as we do. Now, it turns out at the end of that year, that teacher left. And I interviewed that teacher. And I asked why she left. And she said, I had four choices. I could be an advocate for the head of school and supportive of the head of school, but that was not popular. I could be an obstacle to the head of school and join the grumpy crowd, but I did not feel that way and did not want to do that. I could have acted on my own and been a sole force within the school without friends, but that was too lonely for my age level. So my fourth option was to quit, and that's what I chose to do. So heads have to be aware of how school culture and faculty politics either attract or drive away really good teachers. So it takes only 5 very unhappy teachers out of a school of faculty of 60 to create an unhealthy climate. I worked for another school where every single teacher I interviewed, 15, told me of their antipathy toward a board decision 15 years ago to cut 10% of the base salary from every teacher in an effort to save money. And they were all told me that money had never been returned to them. And when I went back and gave this feedback to the head of school, she told me something, of course, I already knew, but she reinforced it. None of the 15 teachers that I had interviewed were there 15 years ago. None of those 15 teachers had actually ever had their salaries cut. But that was part of faculty folklore that we've been ripped off, and we had never, in fact, been made whole again. Even though it wasn't about them, it was about colleagues who maybe were already gone. Myths versus realities. Independent school faculties are viewed publicly as collegial and collaborative. Many school cultures are not. Many school cultures have factions. Independent schools, and I also include international schools, have feudal cultures where faculties are isolationists or silos, upper school silo, middle school silo, lower school silo. These may develop along department or other lines, and you often have a trapped mid-career syndrome, which is not uncommon. A trapped mid-career syndrome means a teacher who feels they could be earning more money, they could be in more of a leadership role, they could be doing better in their life, but they're not, and they're not feeling promoted within the school, and yet they stay and become unhappy. And that unhappiness percolates up and down and makes everybody else unhappy. Most evaluation systems and creative salary systems do not function in practice as they're put in writing. So we examine evaluation protocols in international schools all over the world, the vast majority of which are not actually occurring in practice as they are stated to be in writing. And salary systems that are published in faculty handbooks don't function, in fact, as they in fact were written in the book. There are bonus plans that are based on evaluation of teaching performance in the classroom or workload assessment or outside of the classroom leadership traits, as well as mentoring fellow teachers. There are examples of career ladder, which is a model for growth, which may look like a university model. They may call it a teacher, an experienced teacher, a senior teacher, a master teacher, a faculty leader. I think the ones at King's Academy, for example, there were 5 of them. And the beginning one was a beginning teacher, and the highest one was called the torchbearer, using the phraseology that King Abdullah had used. But the concept is that you grow not just by age, not just by experience, not just by graduate credits, but you grow as well by meeting certain qualitative requirements as you become a better teacher over time, we hope. There's something called salary compression. Salary systems need to more than double from the lowest starting salary to the highest salary paid, preferably go up 2.5 times. Otherwise, that compression affects long-term attitudes and the willingness to stay. So the strongest salary systems pay 2.5 times at the top what they pay at the bottom. Schools need to have a bump in the mean salary. I mentioned this earlier about these cohorts. We'll get to questions shortly. Let me get through here, and I think we'll have plenty of time for questions. More experienced or mid-career teachers may be going down in mean salaries from one cohort to the next. Most independent international schools recruit young teachers and then lose the talented ones within 3 to 5 years. Mid-career teachers are the most often the difficult ones to recruit, and they're often among the least happy in their jobs. Early buyout plans may be needed or used to assist some long-term teachers with retirement. Early buyout plans are not early retirement plans. They're optional, they're voluntary. They usually pay you 1 or 2 years salary over 2 or 3 years, and they are based on a certain number of years of experience and age combined. The banding systems provide a school with the ability to pay its most valued teachers. It enables teachers to know how to influence their own future earning power. They may also reward a group of teachers or a team of teachers. The importance of the head's political capital introducing any new model, what I would say is this, is any head of school who comes into an international school, the average tenure of an international school head is 3.5 years. 80% of these heads are fired in effect. That means most international school heads are not going to tackle the idea of creating an entirely new mission-based salary system from scratch. But if an international school head is there for a while and knows they will be there for a while, there is a real opportunity to create a salary system which builds on that head's political capital over time by virtue of being the person who initiated this holistic view, as opposed to just picking up what you inherited and passing it on to the next person who comes through 3.5 years later. Band systems may include permanent jumps in a base salary, or there may be a bonus paid in the month of June that does not add to base. Rewards may not be merit or competitive, but could be performance-based when measured against mission for individuals or teams or groups. One of the things I always say to boards, when boards tell me they want to have a salary system which recognizes the quality of a teacher's performance, either in or out of the classroom, and teachers say, teaching is an art, not a science. It's not a widget. You can't measure it. And also that you don't want to combine evaluation with compensation. What I always want to remind everybody of is that heads of school and senior administrators always find a way to acknowledge and recognize merit and performance. They just don't call it that. So for example, when a head of school makes someone a department head, a DP coordinator, an IB coordinator, a PYP coordinator, MYP coordinator, a grade level leader, they don't choose people they believe are poor performers. They choose people that they believe are good models and teachers. And that's an indirect way to say, I recognize your quality, even though we're not quantifying it anyway formally, it's informal. Or how many times have I heard this? A teacher is saying she's going to leave because she can earn $6,000 more at a competing school. And the head who wants to keep the teacher says to that person, how would you like to be our assistant community service coordinator? And the teacher says, I didn't know we had one. And the head says, we don't, but we do now, and it pays $6,000 a year. In other words, we create jobs, we create titles, we create new systems to ensure that heads have the flexibility to recruit and reward teachers that otherwise they might lose, and which the existing salary system might prevent them from doing. So there's always a way, but it's often a way that looks over time to be forced or unfair, particularly when teachers start comparing salaries and talking to each other. And someone who's been there 10 years meets another person who came in brand new who's being paid more than they are and maybe of comparable experience. It tends to cause mistrust in the culture. For international school, there's a whole range of benefits. Now, this is the interesting one, of course. What is the foreign hire, or who is the foreign hire? A lot of schools get caught up in this. In the old days, in the international world, a lot of international school teachers, if the foreign hires were paid on one salary system, let's say in a US dollar or a British pound currency, and the local hires were paid on an entirely different salary system with the local currency, that was often seen as unfair. Now, most days, these two groups are paid in the same currency, usually, but the differential is in benefits. In Western Europe, hardly at all. Western Europe, most schools don't provide housing for teachers, but they may still provide tuition remission for kids. They may still provide flights. But there's always this underlying tension between the benefit package for local hires who were recruited locally and foreign hires who were recruited from abroad. And then heads get into real trouble when they start to hire people locally on a foreign hire basis who were not recruited from abroad. They may have been raised abroad, they may have been educated in an English-speaking country, but they were not recruited from abroad, and yet they're treated as a foreign hire. That can create a real morale problem. So that's a foreign hire conundrum. Professional development money is really, really crucial. I think most schools today are spending between $1,000 and $1,500 US per teacher per year in PD money. Not that every teacher gets that money, but I'm talking about how the budget is set overall, perhaps by an amount equivalent to that. And then, of course, how that money is delivered and spent is a key policy question. I don't believe you should give PD dollars to people simply who ask for it every year, because the same teachers tend to ask for it every year and get it. I think some of it ought to be related to the outcome of your teacher evaluation process. Then other benefits we have are housing, flights, medical, retirement, medical movement away from, there's movement away from family medical coverage as discriminatory or too costly towards ensuring every employee shares in the pain of annual increases in medical premiums. This depends very much on the country and the school. For most international schools, there is usually a retirement system that is a national plan that if you stay long enough and earn enough credits, you may in fact get some benefit from it in the long run. But many international schools pay their teachers not really a retirement, but a gratuity payment at the end of the year or per year for every year you're there that is paid when you leave. And that gratuity is considered the equivalent of what would have been a retirement program in another country. If you do have a retirement program, and maybe it's a privately funded one, not the government one, it's wise to consider what the vesting timetable might be for those plans. If you get immediately invested in the school's contribution from year one, that's very generous, not necessarily wise for the school. 5-year vesting is a better tool. So I won't spend a lot of time on that one. Flexible benefits, long-term disability, everybody should be providing it. There should be some life insurance for everybody. A benefit bank is a concept not widely used, but in some schools it's effective. It is basically a pool of money, which everybody gets the same amount, but you can use it differentially as your needs occur. If you want to spend more of it on medical, you can. If you want to spend more of it on some other benefit that you want, I'll show you an example of that in a minute. It's your option to decide how you want to spend it, but it's fair that everybody gets the same dollar or pound or renminbi amount. Tuition remission can be sensitive. We're talking here about staff and faculty children, often overseas for foreign hires, that's automatic at 100%. And there's sometimes tension because that's not usually the same rate for local hires. So that can be a source of disagreement. In fact, the benefit tension between local and foreign hires, I find as a continuing and rising source of tension in international schools around the world. Now, a point system for benefits. This actually comes from a client school in Latin America. They decided for both foreign hires and local hires to create a point system where they have a whole list of benefits that you can have, and they give you at most 100 points, and all of the benefits are scored for a number of points based on the cost to the school. Foreign hires tend to choose a certain set of benefits that local hires don't choose, and vice versa. But it basically costs about the same amount of money for every teacher, and you can choose which set of benefits you want and change them from year to year. Extra benefits may be additional retirement contribution, an additional percentage of tuition remission, an extra personal day, a supplemental life or disability policy, or international health care. The number of points assigned to each extra varies with the expense to the school. So some of you know Chinese. I always love jihui. It's an opportunity, but huiji, the other part of it, means crisis. So I think the crunch for high quality teachers offers a lot of challenge and opportunities for both. I think right now we're looking at teachers who need to be paid attention to. I think it's not just about the amount of money we're paying. I think we really have to look at teacher needs. We have to look about the concept of sabbaticals, time off, professional development opportunities, short-term and long-term ways to make the teaching profession, frankly, more sustainable in the long run. I think we have to assess long-term faculty retirement assets, sometimes confidentially if we can, and find out how well our longer-serving teachers are actually doing. I think we have to look at why teachers come and why they leave, but all this goes back to creating a philosophy of compensation that is mission-based. So let me drop off the screen and see what questions may have been prompted by these remarks or others I may make in our remaining time.
John, several of them came in. One of them, someone wanted to have more clarity on the concept that you talked about, compression.
Yeah, well, compression simply means that if you stay long-term at a school, and some of your faculty do stay long-term and some of your faculty are passing through, but compression basically means you don't have enough room to grow over time. So if your salary system or your salary scale starts at, let's say, 40 or 50,000 US a year, and the top of the scale is say 60 or 70,000 US a year, that's compression. So generally, there should be at least double the salary from the bottom to the top to avoid that feeling of compression that teachers have. By compression, it means there's no room to grow. You're stuck. Really good schools will go up 2.5 times from the entry-level salary paid to the highest level salary paid. And I'm talking about classroom teachers. I'm not talking about people in senior administrative posts. So all of my remarks today have not been addressed to high school principals, middle or lower school principals. They've been addressed to the teacher, rank and file classroom teacher cohort. Although obviously there's relationships in a lot of this as well to senior administrative people. Chris Urban, you had your hand up a while back.
Yeah, that was the question about compression. Jared Hall was asking about the 2.5 differential doubling from the lower end to the top end.
Same question.
Jared, was that adequate, the answer you got, or did you want to pursue that a little bit more?
So let me give you an example. I've got a client school in Switzerland. Actually, I have 8 client schools in Switzerland. They all behave in a fairly similar way. But this school has a career ladder salary system. It does not have any room in it for advanced degrees or graduate credits. That's not any part of their salary system. So it's not based on that American model. But it has 4 scales. It has an entry scale, a main scale, a senior teacher scale, and a leader teacher scale. Each of the scales has two parts. One is the longevity-based scale, where you get more money every year for each year you stay up to a point. It's like 10 steps. And then you have the option to move laterally to the next system. That next system would be going from beginning teacher to main scale teacher to senior teacher to faculty leader. And each of those shifts also have steps in them. And what's interesting is in most of those systems, you either can apply to move across laterally, or you are appointed or nominated to move across laterally by a group of administrators who are assessing your performance in 5 realms: teaching quality in the classroom, mentoring and collaborating with fellow teachers, innovation and openness to change, willingness to accept criticism, openness to pastoral care and advising of kids, and willingness to work with parents as clients. Those issues that I just mentioned tend to be the ones that these schools are looking at, in addition to years of experience, as a basis for determining moving laterally across. So if you take Harvard University, for example, the vast majority of teachers at Harvard are instructors. Then you might get moved to an assistant professor. Assistant professors and instructors are not tenured, but there's a lot of them. Then the next higher level up is associate professor. Most of the associate professors have tenure. And then the highest level is full professor. So what percent of Harvard do you think of all the teaching staff are full professors? Well, I don't know that number, but it's fairly small, because if everybody was a full professor, it would both mean the coin of the realm was pretty cheap, and it would be overwhelmingly expensive. So any school is going to have to allocate its resources to say, those getting the highest amount of money up here are not just getting it because of age or experience or graduate degrees, but are they also getting it because there's other things they're fulfilling in the way of mission-based criteria? And by the way, 2 of those criteria to me would be crucial, and that is collaborating with and mentoring and coaching fellow teachers, and being open to criticism as well as praise, and being open to change and constructive feedback, as opposed to somebody who thinks they're perfect and can get no better.
Let me share another question we have in the chat from Sarah. Any suggestion on how to get our school board more involved in benefits and compensation? As you said, our benefits and compensation is 68% of our expenses, yet our board never reviews it.
Okay, let me give an example. I'm going to ask you to just bear with me. And I'm not doing this to sell my own services, but because the guy who wrote the letter explained so clearly what we talk about doing. This is a letter I'd like to share with you, if I can figure out how to do it. Can you see this? Okay, this is a school with 20, okay, this is the Gulliver Schools in Miami with 2,600 kids in 4 campus sites. I did not ask him to write this letter. I'm writing this letter to share our school's transformative experience working with John Littleford, and to give my highest absolute recommendation for John. 1 week ago today, we presented recommendations for a completely new faculty evaluation system, restructured salary system, and enhanced benefits to our 300 faculty members. These recommendations were developed through an inclusive, in-depth process designed and led by John. As I shared with our faculty last week, in the words of Cervantes, truly, the journey is better than the end. In speaking with John about the process before beginning the work, he outlined how trustees would be engaged and involved with faculty. And one of the promises he made was that trustees and faculty members would walk in each other's shoes. We certainly experienced that result through the process. At John's direction, we had 30 teachers, 10 administrators, 10 trustees involved in serving on 3 subcommittees for evaluation, salary, and benefits. Our trustees gained a deeper appreciation for what our teachers do day in and day out, and understand issues better from the perspectives of a teacher. Similarly, the teachers who participated were able to see how trustees think about the school at the fiduciary, strategic, and generative levels. John's clearly an expert with vast experience in independent schools around the world, yet he always seems to know exactly when to share expertise and best practice, and when to allow us to go in a direction that's unique and mission appropriate to Gulliver and our culture. Another of his promises is that we would develop a compensation system based on an articulated philosophy of compensation grounded in our mission. Again, John delivered on this promise, and I know with certainty the new compensation system we develop is both mission-driven and mission-enhancing. Now, what I want you to see is this next sentence. Go to the second line. For a process around such critical issues, that is the livelihood of teachers and over 60% of the budget for trustees, the confidence and trust John builds with both groups absolutely critical for success. What's key there is the process where you have board members, administrators, and teachers working together collaboratively over a period of time to work out the best possible benefits evaluation and salary system, and where it's not collective bargaining, it's not adversarial, it's a cooperative process. So let me close on this. I was doing this process for a school in Eastern Europe about 4 years ago. And I told a story at the end about a college professor I had named Don Flaherty and the difference he made in my life as a teacher. And a member of the board of trustees of the school stood up and said, "Can I tell you my story?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Well, I went to an international school in Africa, and I think it was Zambia actually. And he said, right now in Hungary, I'm an American citizen, but I'm also a citizen of this country. And I own a chain of for-profit hospitals, so I'm very successful. But I actually went to an international school in Zambia. And I found that my music teacher that I had in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade was retiring at age 65 after some 30 years. And he was so powerful in his impact on my life in the choral work we did together as a very good choir, that I called him on Zoom. And as he picked up the screen invitation, I sang to him a song that he had taught us when we were 6th graders. And he started to cry. And then he sang the second verse back to me, and I started to cry. And then the two of us sang the third verse of the song together, and we both cried. And he said, he meant so much to me that I wanted to turn around and thank him in return. And I think I did. And he said, Mr. Littleford, what you have taught me about your story today is one of the most important jobs for heads, is to find teachers who make that kind of dramatic difference in the lives of children. And that the role of boards is to provide the guidelines, the safety, and the resources to make sure that can happen. So on that note, I would tell you that I think salary and salary systems, the amount of money is important, but the way in which you design it, the way in which you use it, the message that you send out by virtue of that system is equally, if not more important. So I thank you all for your time. And Ed, I thank you for sponsoring
And
this.
John, thank you. And we do have actually a couple more questions.
Okay,
in the
go ahead.
chat,
Got a
if you
couple
don't
minutes.
mind. What is the best practice, in your opinion, on local higher tuition when local students are eligible to attend?
Yep, it's a very important and political question. I deal with this a lot, for example, in Latin America. One client school of mine came to a resolution. The foreign hires get 100% tuition remission because you could not recruit them to the school if you did not provide that benefit. But what the school did is for the local hires, it had a 50% guarantee of tuition remission up to a certain budget level. And once that budget level was reached, you could not get more kids in the school until some of those kids left. So the board was concerned that they had so many local hires who stayed for so long that if they went 100% tuition remission for that particular group of staff, they'd break the bank and they probably have to stop the whole process. So they were trying to find some equitable and fair way to make it happen. So they offered the 50% remission and then in effect, some financial aid above that within reason of what the budget would tolerate. And once the budget cap was reached, no more of those kids would be eligible until other kids left. But there is no, silver bullet to solve that issue. I don't think it's an issue of inequity. Foreign hires generally come in and leave. So their children are not likely to be there long term. Now, by the way, I worked with two schools in Austria. One of them, the teachers came and never left. And the other one, they came and left every 2 years. And guess what the difference was? The first school, the teachers did not pay Austrian taxes because of a relationship with the American government. And so because of that, those teachers tended to come and marry Austrians, buy a home and settle down and never leave. So their big issue was lack of turnover. The other school had a tax break for 2 years only. And after that, most of the teachers left. So they had no institutional memory. So there's an example of how local tax law, as it affects international hires, can either mean you stay too long or you stay not long enough. So all of this aspect of stability of school faculty can have a dramatic impact based on how you pay teachers and what the tax implication is. Was there another question?
Yeah. And Joseph, you can chime in here if I don't get your question quite right. Is that, can you talk about the delivery systems for faculty benefits and compensation? You mentioned it's often more about how teachers perceive they are treated and not how the system is actually written. In your experience, what are some common practices that teachers perceive to be unfair, common pain points? Pain points, yeah.
Well, first of all, I think teachers will always perceive salary delivery as unfair if they feel someone else of comparable background and experience is being paid more than they are, or someone hired newer from the marketplace is being paid more than they are. And increasingly, teachers do share this confidential information, and schools can't really prevent that. So I think when you go into the kind of process that I've been discussing, you have to say somehow some teachers got to the top of the salary system due to some really effective negotiation on their part over time. They may have to be held back a little bit. I don't believe anybody in any process of this process of looking at compensation ever had their salary cut, but that one group may be growing less fast. There may be another group of teachers who is not as well paid, and nobody can explain why. And there's nothing in the evaluation files in the record that could possibly say why these people are poorly paid. It was probably because they were poor negotiators upon arrival. Their initial salary may not have been very competitive or fair. So when you start at a low base, a percentage of a low base remains low. So you may need an equity pool of money, which is a pool of money that the board allocates specifically to bring people up whom we have no real explanation for how they got to be where they were. And so they get placed on whatever the salary system is as part of that equity process. But again, if you think about philosophy, teachers want predictability. Okay, we give them some predictability, but teachers also want the ability to influence their own future earning power. You have to find a way to do that other than just by having them take on more and more jobs. One quick example, a boarding school in the southern part of the United States that many years ago designed a point system. You got points for everything, every job you took on, department head, coaching, dorm work, whatever. And when I got there 30 years later and was asked to assess how it was working, I found out the young and mid-career teachers were exhausted. They were running around like chickens with their heads cut off. They were taking on every single job they could take on to earn more money and stipends. They wanted to have a baby or get married or buy a house. And they just grabbed everything they could, whether or not they were good at it, whether or not they wanted to do it. And when I asked them all what they did with the exhaustion, they were obviously reflecting to me, guess what? Out of 250 points you got each year, and the board set the value of each point each year, only 36 points were for the 4 classes you taught. All the other points were for coaching, extra activities, and dorm work. So can you guess what they told me suffered as a result of that system? They were never prepared for class the next day. Their actual quality of teaching, in their opinion, was low, and this was appalling to the board and the administration that had no idea. So salary systems that get designed often don't really think about the long-term impact of what that might be on teacher behavior. The whole point of this system was to be fair and voluntary and give teachers more control over their money. But the unintended outcome was they were all exhausted and teaching was being hurt. So this whole concept of salary system design is very important.
I want to close there unless if I missed a question. I think I got everything in the chat. John, thank you so very much for your time and your insights. This is an eternal question, the whole issue about compensation and benefits. And I think your point earlier on really bears repeating, that based on what people have been going through in the past 2 years, it's a time for careful attention on the benefit side to support, making people feel supported and giving them the time to, let the air out of the tires now and then and slow it down, because it is a difficult time, one of the most difficult times I think either of us have seen in our career. Yeah. The recording, just so you know, will be made available probably Monday. We'll try to get it up Monday. And I think that's fair. I can get it up by Monday, I believe. Other than that, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And again, to thank John for sharing his considerable knowledge on this topic with us. And I wish all of you well for the weekend and for the months ahead. And I'm hoping we'll see some of you, we'll keep our fingers crossed, for a face-to-face conference in March in Bangkok at the end of March. A lot of things have to fall into place for it, but we're planning it, and look forward to seeing you in person one of these days. But thank you so much, all of you, and enjoy the weekend. John,
Thanks,
thank you so
everybody.
much.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye-bye.